So we're going to start off with the Elite Eight. Michigan State fell to Auburn. Izzo was looking for his 15th comeback from behind win in the tournament, NCAA tournament in his career. Houston thrashed Tennessee, which was pretty surprising to me. I thought that Tennessee was going to actually upset Houston and go to the Final Four. I actually had them in my bracket in the Final Four. So I almost had my Final Four almost perfect, but Michigan State and Tennessee lost that one for me. Duke destroyed Alabama. It is safe to say that Cooper Flag is the real deal, and he will be the number one pick. And I will think that he probably will change the organization the minute he gets there. Whether it's the Wizards, the Jazz, hopefully my organization, the Hornets, or the what's the other one? The New Orleans Pelicans as well. Wherever he
I'm
goes,
gonna interrupt you really quick here. I
what?
apologize. I have a sneaky spot that I think he could end up, and I think it could if Philly's pick lands in the top 6, they get it, correct?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
I think they might, because you know how there's this conspiracy, how they've rigged the lottery in the past, potentially. Hearsay, of course, but I feel like there's
LeBron
a
even said
chance.
something on Pat McAfee the other day about, hey, I don't know how Cleveland got the number one pick in 03, but they did. And then same with Patrick Ewing in the 80s, but continue.
Yeah, I think there might be some shenanigans going on, and Cooper Flag ends up a 76er. Mark my words here. This could end up blowing up in my face.
Well, I think there is some merit to that. And that's simply because we've seen and heard some rumors about Joel Embiid and about Joel Embiid's availability going forward as a 76er. He has missed more games in his career than he has games played, which is really something to think about. And Cooper Flag is a guy, yes, he's not a traditional 5 in the rotation. He's going to be a 4. He's not really a tall 3. He's a true power forward. He's a true oversized wing. He's not big enough to be the center. He can be the stretch 5 in certain lineups, but you can't really replace Embiid with Cooper Flag, but you can definitely use him as a stopgap at that 5 spot. If the Sixers rumors about them making Joel Embiid medically retire are true or somehow come to fruition, that is something to keep an eye on, Chris. I actually really like that take. I think that's a take that should get a lot more merit than it does.
I also do want to say that there's a certain podcaster on that team that needs to be replaced probably at some point too. So he can just ride off into the sunset and film podcasts for the rest of his life.
Oh, definitely. Paul George is, as a Paul George fantasy owner, I'm appalled at just how abysmal his season has been as a Philadelphia 76er. And yes, that's another way that if Cooper Flag would end up making his way over to the Sixers, that's another spot he can replace too. Like I said, he's not truly a 3 in the rotation. He's really an oversized wing, so he fits perfectly as a power forward in any standard rotation. But I mean, Paul George is pretty versatile. He's played the forward, some lineups, some rotations this year for the Sixers because they've had Kelly Oubre, KJ Martin, guys like that. So I think Cooper Flag to the Sixers actually makes sense. I'm very glad you brought that up.
That's very actually interesting because it's wondering what are they going to do with Joel Embiid? In my opinion, are they going to move with Cooper Flag with Joel Embiid, or are they going to get rid of Joel Embiid and start over with Cooper Flag? So that's a good question. That's actually a good point to actually bring up. And I did want to say Florida did come back from a 10-point deficit it wasn't an upset, but they found a way to win that game when they were pretty much counted out of it at that point. So I will say that Cooper Flag is the real deal. But the most surprising thing for me in the tournament was St. John's and Calipari. We all knew that the Kansas game was not going to be an upset. We all knew that for a fact. A lot of people, if you knew basketball, then you already knew that wasn't going to really be an upset because Kansas wasn't that good at all this year.
I would say that game was a toss-up in my opinion. I really think either team could have won that, and it just ended up bouncing Arkansas's way.
Well, with the way Kansas looked throughout the entire season, I could see why people would say that wasn't really an upset because they really did not look like the Kansas of old. I mean, even when they went to BYU, they got thrashed. I mean, it was pretty pretty bad. Now, I will say a surprise was Michigan going all the way to the Sweet 16. I didn't see that coming. I thought they would have lost to San Diego, which they should have lost to San Diego, but they found a way to come out and pull that game out. And how about Ole Miss coming out of the blue? You know, they started off the season not the greatest, but they found a way to get to the Sweet 16 to play Michigan State, and you know, it was pretty impressive from what I seen from them. So
And
our Final
they
Four
held
looks
their
like,
own.
yeah,
They really held their own, Jalen. I was not huge on Ole Miss this year by any means. And it simply stems from the fact that this SEC did not deserve to have 14 teams make it.
That's exactly how I felt, Sam. I
Yeah.
really just thought the SEC just had way too many teams. But then each one of their teams pretty much showed why they deserve to be there. And I know we had a discussion about this on Hawk Talk yesterday that we just didn't think the seeding was done very well this year at all. And then there were teams like Creighton where they had a bit of a rougher earlier season or conference season, and they got underseeded, and they had to play against a team like Louisville, who everyone almost counted as a shoo-in in that game, and it was blowout right from the start.
You know, Louisville would be my biggest disappointment. 100%. This tournament, they were my biggest disappointment because, yes, you're playing in Rupp Arena. You struggle in Rupp Arena. It's Louisville versus UK. That's a big rivalry in the state of Kentucky. But that's a home game. That is truly a home game when you think about it. You have Creighton, who has to travel 10 plus hours from Omaha, Nebraska, and take off all the way to Lexington, where Louisville's just got a 2-hour drive up 64. That's something that I thought Louisville honestly had a shot at the Elite Eight. I honestly thought they had a shot at the Elite Eight, and the reason why is simply because of that home court advantage. Now, Creighton decided to really ball out in that series. Stephen Ashworth especially, he was reminding people that 24-year-olds can play college basketball too. 6 of 13 from the field, 4 of 8 from 3, 5 rebounds, 22 points in that game. Ryan Kalkbrenner with 14 as well. Neal with 29 leading the way for Creighton. So they had 3 guys in double digits, 2 guys in 20 plus, and that just wasn't enough for Chucky Hepburn and the Scraps to overcome. But I'd still consider it a disappointment on that front. Going back to Ole Miss here, like we talked about, the SEC did not deserve to have 14 teams. And regardless of what the tournament success shows, that does not negate the fact that the SEC should not have had all these teams. And same with Arkansas is one of them. They beat Kansas. They beat St. John's. That they're one of those teams that did not deserve to be there. And despite the tournament success, that's irrelevant here. The fact that the SEC got 14 teams, I don't care that they were the best conference in college basketball. We should have had 2 A10 teams in. We should have. We should have had George Mason and VCU. I don't care that VCU lost to BYU right away. We should have had both of those teams in. George Mason, if I'm not mistaken, went on to at least make it to the Final Four of the NIT. So we should have had at least 2 A10 teams. The ACC was, for lack of a better term, bad at basketball this year. The Big Ten was fairly good. What was that?
Other than Duke, of course.
Oh, well, yeah, they're the anomaly here.
They're
but
the outlier.
Exactly. So I don't know. I guess I don't know why we still give the SEC merit here, even though they had 14 teams making. I'd say out of those 14 teams, Ole Miss, who finished really low in the SEC this year, they had a good tournament run. That's why they were a 6 seed. Ole Miss, Arkansas, Vanderbilt even
I actually
didn't really
Vanderbilt
deserve to
beating
be
St.
there.
Mary's.
A lot of people did. And the reason for that is because St. Mary's offense is so stagnated. But their defense is more than enough to overcome that, which is why I still was confident in figuring that they were going to win that game despite being down 11 or so right before halftime.
What I learned this year is just offensive teams really had the power this tournament, with the exception of Houston, because they're just a different beast. A lot of the other offensive teams, like Alabama, had a great run. BYU had a great run. You look at Arizona, they put up not the best fight against Duke, but the best fight we've seen so far. A lot of the teams that are offense dependent had a lot better of a run than, say, a St. Mary's or a team that I thought, or a St. John's, for example, that I thought because of how stout their defense was, they were going to be able to make a run. And St. John's lost in the second round. I don't think many people saw them losing that early in the tournament. I personally was a little skeptical of them, but thought that they just had enough defensive firepower and the head coach aspect to be able to make a really deep run in this tournament. And I was so wrong about that.
Well, it's simply because St. John's in the Ken Palm rankings, they were the number one team in terms of defensive efficiency. They were the best defensive team in the country, and you could see it with guys like RJ Lewis down low. I mean, the team itself offensively was never that good. That's something we all kind of have to realize now, is that the offensive scheming, the schematics of that team were just never that good on offense. It was good enough to run through the Big East, and because they got hot, that was the way to win the Big East tournament, was just get hot, right? That's all you needed to do. UConn was struggling this year. Marquette really hit the brakes hard. They ran into a wall.
Honestly,
they ran into a wall pretty dang hard.
They looked
going
good
into the conference tournament.
Years.
Oh, they were a top 10 team. They were almost in the top 5 at one point. If I'm not mistaken, they were ranked 5th at one point.
After they beat
was the
Wisconsin.
Game. Yeah, and then they lost to Iowa State in Iowa State, and they held their own. And that's when I thought that if they can take Milan Momcilovic and Keyshawn Gilbert, that team into a game on their home turf, that this Marquette team was going to be gross this year. And then another Shaka Smart failure, another loss in the first round. They've only made it into the Sweet 16, I think, once in Shaka Smart's tenure there.
Not even second round. They lost second round last year, I'm pretty sure. They got upset because they were a 2 seed. I think that was it was either last year or the year before. They were a 2 seed.
Last year, they were a 2 seed and beat Western Kentucky.
In the first round, right?
Yeah, in the first round, they beat Western Kentucky. But Western Kentucky even gave them a run for their money for a little bit. I mean, we got to be serious with ourselves here. Yeah, they made the Sweet 16 last year. They defeated Western Kentucky. They beat Colorado fresh off of an upset over Florida. I don't know if you guys watched that game last year, but Walter Clayton Jr. versus KJ Sampson was must-watch television. And then they ended up losing to the NC State Cinderella run in the Sweet 16.
Which is a game they still should have won.
Correct. Yes. And that's
but
that's the beauty of the tournament, though. That's the beauty of the tournament, is there's a lot of shit that happens that should not happen. And that's what makes March the best month in all of I'm going to just call it professional sports. We know what we're talking about here. It's the best month in sports, period, is March.
I can agree.
The best month in sports.
Sure. You just have so much going on the entire time. It's wild. It really is. But this year, there was just such a lack of upsets in both conference tournaments and in the NCAA tournament. I had a segment on this on Hawk Talk yesterday, and I called it Nails on a Chalkboard because I was just so frustrated this year with how chalk the tournament was. Because I'm someone in my bracket that loves to go for upsets. And let's just say, Sam, there's a reason why I'm in 34th place in your bracket pool right now.
You know, I'm like 33rd for the very same reasons. But, I mean, the upsets were still there. The upsets were still there. We can't ignore that. I mean, Drake over Missouri. The problem is it was the popular upsets that happened.
Yeah, who saw that coming?
The upsets that everyone thought was going to happen.
The only one I didn't think was going to happen was Arkansas over Kansas. That was the only one I didn't think was feasible. And it happened. That's the only exciting part of the tournament, was Arkansas making the Sweet 16, being this year's Cinderella, for lack of a better term. But Drake over Missouri still happened. Arkansas over Kansas still happened. Both of those games were 7+ point games. Colorado State the same way over Memphis, and then nearly beating Maryland. They nearly became this year's Cinderella. McNeese over Clemson. That was one of the best first round games I think I've ever watched. Watching McNeese, who a lot of people, a la Brendan Donlevy, one of our former colleagues over at the radio station, his terminology, McNeesing everywhere during that game. He was really letting me have it, because we watched that game together, And he was so excited about McNeese last year when they got the break speed off of them and we were all giving him flack for it. And he didn't say a word for about 3 hours after McNeese got blown out by 40. But then this year he was letting us have it. He was letting me have it because of how high I was on Clemson. And that game, Clemson, 18 points in the last minute. And they lost by
they
2.
They had lost by 2, ended up losing by 2, which was actually crazy. See, I didn't foresee what I was thinking about previous years when I was thinking about the McNeese pick. I had picked them like 2 years in a row when they made the tournament. I'm not sure if they made it 2 years in a row, but I know
this is their second year.
Go ahead.
This is their second year, I was saying.
Okay, yeah. So I had picked them at least twice the past 2 seasons, and I wasn't falling for it this year. I said, you know what? I'm not falling for it. And they won. So
that's how that usually goes. That's how I was with Ole Miss. I was debating. I watched the games with my roommates the first 2 days and a couple of our friends. And I was sitting here. One of them had Ole Miss to the Sweet 16. I'm like, no, that's just not happening. North Carolina is going to beat them first round. Your dream's going to be over. And now that's another discussion. North Carolina should not have gotten in. I don't even think that's a hot take. I think that's honestly surface level for the most part. But
yeah,
it was just
that's just a take. That's just a take. And UNC they blew out San Diego State, and that's honestly San Diego State UNC. Regardless of who won that matchup, I thought they were going to beat Ole Miss. I thought they were, and UNC. I was talking to a student of mine, and we were talking about the bracket going into. It was the day before day 1 of games, so it was the last day of the first 4. And we were both agreed. We were both in agreement that this was not the UNC teams that we were watching back in November, back in December. That was not the UNC team that went 1-12 in quad ones this year.
You know what it was? San Diego State, I believe, was a quad 2 team this year.
They were. That's what it was. That was the what's the term I'm looking for, man? Slow start to the morning today. But that was a game that was not expected to end in that fashion, is what I'm trying to say.
Well, I can say that my dad had to eat it when every time Michigan State kept winning because he had Bryant going to the Sweet 16. He was telling me he was adamant about, Michigan State is going to lose to Bryant. Bryant is, I'm telling you, they announcers, all the people I've been watching, Bryant is it. Bryant, and they get thrashed.
Well, so they hung with Michigan State actually for, I don't remember if it was
a little bit.
For the first 10 minutes, it was pretty. For the first 10 minutes, it was pretty close. I will say it was what was it, about like a 10-point lead that they had?
Something like that. I mean, it got up to the blowout stage by the end, and that was kind of the first round. Even was when I realized like St. John's and Michigan State aren't who I thought they were, because St. John's, I forget who they played against, but they really struggled to pull away in that game. I'm like,
they played against Omaha.
Yeah, they struggled to pull away against Omaha for the longest time. And it ended up like the score didn't reflect how close the game was for the majority.
That's correct. And that is honestly, if I'm being dead serious, it was a 30-point game. But at halftime, they were down 5. Omaha was only down 5. They were out shooting St. John's in the first half. And this is what we're talking about, where St. John's is not that great offensively. They're just not. They ended up having a great second half and shooting 37.8% from the 3-point line, which kind of propelled them. Whereas Omaha in the second half just completely fell off a bridge. 25% shooting, 13 from 3. Only 5 threes made all game. And if I'm not mistaken, they were all in the first half. And that was a game that in the first half, and even pre-game, I was confident in saying that if there was any 15-2 this year, it was going to be that game. It was going to be that game. I was fairly high on St. John's going into the tournament, but I was not high enough on them to think that maybe they were safe from being upset. And they ended up getting upset in the second round, but that's besides the point. I liked Omaha. I liked their team chemistry. They beat up a trash can after every game they won this year. They just go to Walmart, find a really, crappy little trash can and just take it to town in the locker room after wins. And that rode them to their first tournament appearance. I think Omaha, if I'm not mistaken, is a team from the Summit
League, yeah.
League.
Because
Yeah,
Elite
the
State
Summit.
promised to make it to the tournament.
Yeah, and the Summit League for basketball has got NDSU, North Dakota, SDSU, South Dakota, and a couple other schools in that realm. I think Omaha, we'll be seeing more of them in the near future. We'll be seeing a lot more of Omaha, and this is just the beginning of it. And they were taking it to St. John's for a little bit. I'm cool with saying that game was a lot closer than the 30 points that it was.
Yeah, I can agree. So our Final Four will be Duke and Alabama, and we have
Houston,
Florida versus Auburn.
Duke and Houston.
Yeah, Duke and Houston.
Duke and Houston, my bad. Duke and Houston. And on the girls' side, you have Texas and South Carolina, and then you have UConn and UCLA. Well, I thought the USC team was going to be able to beat UConn, but I guess without Juju, that was going to be a tough task, especially with Paige Beckers.